Welcome to this month's compliance call. Couple of additional housekeeping things. Here in the great state of Oklahoma, we have had some issues with power. We've had some pretty gnarly storms. So if connectivity gets a little squirrely or anything like that, and something odd happens, we will jump right back in. But we've talked about having cameras off and things like that previously. It's kind of extra critical this time because bandwidth is getting better, but it is extra iffy this month. So we're kind of trying to get everybody's connectivity and everybody's power back online. Um, oh, thank you very much. I see in the chat that Dan, if anyone has not seen, that we have the ability to look at the recording from last time. So you can see that in the chat. It is on the YouTube playlist. You can also get at our recordings from the RC Care Toolkit on the Exchange by clicking on the RC Care Office Hours page. And there's a link for each of the review cadres. So we are scheduled for 60 minutes today. Please feel free to type questions in the chat as you have them. You can also raise hands. We do have a pretty packed agenda today. We're going to talk about some types of fraud. We are going to talk about two-factor authentication, going to touch briefly on the compliance dashboard, where to look for ID and address confirmation notes, how to document your work, what to do if you want to deploy on a large DR. To be fair, all of our deployments are virtual. We're going to talk about the fraud triangle, 3 different types of fraud, and then we're going to touch very briefly on accessibility. Accessibility is not specifically in our wheelhouse, but I've gotten several questions about it, and so just want to kind of say, oh, hey, there's been a couple of changes in RC Care and want to make you aware of a couple of resources that are available to you. So let us begin. We talked about this last time, but remember that multi-factor authentication is coming for console users. So if you are on this call and you're a console user, so for our reviewers, that is our document reviewers and our compliance reviewers, this is coming. So you will have multi-factor authentication every time you log in. It's going live for us on July 11th.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
It's Ariane. I do want to, so sorry, I didn't get this information to you ahead of time. We have had a slight delay in multi-factor authentication.
Oh, okay.
So it is going to go a little bit later than July. We don't have dates yet.
Oh, okay.
But we're putting a little bit of a pause to get some
Cool.
more user feedback and find alternate options for those that don't have a smartphone. So
okay, cool.
But well, it is coming, just not as quickly. So
well, apologies for my incorrect info, and Ariane, thank you for the save. But it is coming, but more info to come. So thankful for the 4th bullet there. We will share more info when we have it. As always, when you're looking for cases to review, I know we have had kind of in a capacity building state right now, and you need to find cases for review. Go to your regional compliance detailed case review dashboard. Make sure you are setting the opened date filter to all, and then click the refresh button. It's this button right here on the dashboard itself, not the refresh button on your browser. So, and then any case that shows up on the dashboard does need a compliance review. For those cases that have fake phone numbers or that have potential fake phone numbers, excuse me, we have the filter has been catching some real phone numbers in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to go back and make some tweaks to the filters. And so those real phone numbers that are getting caught by accident will probably be falling off. So stand by and stay tuned for that. That should be happening here pretty soon. So thank you for the feedback on that, y'all, for those that made us aware of that problem. Now, we're going to start with where to look for ID and address confirmation information. This is specifically for ID or address confirmation that was done by fire department or emergency management or other response officials, neighbors, relatives, or landlords. Now, ideally, during intake, the intake workers would put that information in the response official or neighbor/relative field in the eligibility section of the case. And so would have at least the name or badge number of the individual who provided the ID or address confirmation and their phone number. So that is the minimum requirement. It's great if we have additional info, like if they're a response official, having the agency name and all of that. But the minimum required info is name or badge number and phone number of the response official, neighbor, relative, or landlord who confirmed the ID and or the address. So ideally, this is all confirmed and documented during intake. However, if something goes wrong and that information isn't entered correctly or completely during intake, then the workers can go back and put information containing that information and document it into the case comments and the case feed. So this information can be recorded in the case comments if it was not done during intake. Now, and Ariane, you might be able to speak to this a little bit more. I know we've seen some issues if the response official or neighbor relative field is completely blank. I think we've had a couple of those cases recently, yes?
Yes, like for on intake with the second responder trying to verify. Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, one was going back and forth during intake and it wiped out and it still let them proceed without having the information. And the other one, I can't remember exactly what its issue was, but it was having issues with verifying it in my actions afterwards without that being filled. And a technical exception can help fix that.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, so I know in a lot of cases, this response official or neighbor relative field is incompletely filled out, but generally we still have something in it. If it is completely blank, sometimes that can cause technical problems. So as you're working with your regions, please kind of help make sure that they know just how crucial it is to get that information in there during intake. It will also help make things faster for them and for the client. One of the other places that we see ID address confirmation information show up is in the POC notes in the damage verification authentication. The reason why it shows up at the damage verification authentication is that the ID and address verification authentication POC notes do not collect data and store it. Ideally, the info really shouldn't be there, but if it's there and if it's specifically, like emphasis on specifically, says that that person confirmed the ID or the address, not just the damage, then for compliance purposes, we can go ahead and take it as being documented. Are there any questions about that? I know that's kind of a lot.
Chris, that's excellent information.
Oh, Kevin, are you asking in the chat? Kevin asks, how soon after the response is the response official or neighbor relative entry line closed? Do you mean like when can they put the information in?
Right. What happens is I get a lot of responses back, after letting the responders know that they're missing, a phone number or name. And they come back and say, I can no longer make an entry on that line within the eligibility section. So I'm wondering, how quick is that closed off to them?
It is closed off after intake is complete. So if it is after intake, then the information has to go in the case feed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, we are hoping to get to a point, and Kevin, that's a great segue, to get to a point where they will be able to go back in after intake to add that information, but we are not there yet. So trying to get there, just not there yet, and we don't have an ETA yet. Now, we kind of talked about this last month, but remember when you're marking a compliance status, remember to document your work in the case feed. This is regardless of whether you mark a case compliant, non-compliant, or pending. If a case is missing information, it's a best practice. Go ahead and indicate what information is needed, but make sure that your comments are clear, but not accusatory or inflammatory. If a case looks like it might be fraud, it's okay to say, escalating this case for more review. You don't have to say, hey, I think this client is trying to commit a giant fraud or something. Because if the case is ever subject to a subpoena, it's possible that all those comments may be included in that subpoena. And so maintaining that neutrality is really important because we are not judge and jury at any point in our dealings with our clients. Even if they are committing fraud, that is up to law enforcement and the legal system to, pardon me, to handle and adjudicate. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. So kind of related to that, if you see comments that accuse clients or workforce members of fraud or illegal or unethical activity, or violate a client's right to health and mental health privacy, or provide specific health or mental health information in the case feed, or are unethical in any way, notify your supervisor and please contact me. I'm at chris.davis@redcross.org. If you see something, say something. We want to make sure that we are maintaining neutrality and protecting our workforce and protecting our clients. Anytime we put something into the case feed, that is a Red Cross business record, and we need to make sure we're documenting accordingly. So kind of keep that in mind. In general, as a workforce, we do a great job with that. So just kind of stay on the lookout, and if you see something, kind of be aware. Sheila, you have a question?
Yes. I'm just curious. I know you're talking about the actual case, but what about dispatch logs? Does that apply to them also?
Dispatch logs, are the same way. It is possible, like if there's a concern, it is possible to convey that without being accusatory. The question that I always ask myself is, how would I feel if this were either read in such a way that I said it about someone or someone said this about me, either in open court or on the 5 o'clock news? And so everything we write in any of our systems, we should write kind of with those sorts of things in mind. And so, it is okay to say, I am uncertain about this client's ability to provide ID or address confirmation. I mean, that's just fact. That's okay. But if you say this client is a fraud face, like, not sure that that's ideal. So, we want to make sure that we're kind of keeping that threshold in mind. The courtroom and the 5 o'clock news, and both you saying it about somebody and somebody saying it about you. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I know I'm probably a little bit off topic, but reason I was asking because we got national dispatch now, and I've seen in some of their dispatches that come through, they talk about, who started the fire, might have started the fire, and sometimes I've seen medical information come through. So I was just curious if quote unquote compliance uh, rules apply to them also, or
Oh
are
yeah.
those ever subpoenaed?
Yes, they are sometimes subpoenaed. Yes. All of that falls under Red Cross business records. And at its core, I mean, we talk about all the time, we talk about, fraud mitigation, fraud detection, fraud prevention, all of that. But at its core, what compliance is making sure things happened according to program guidelines. So if you see something in RC Respond that does not adhere to those program guidelines, follow the exact same steps. Notify your supervisor and contact me. And, just say, hey, like, something's funky here. Now, one of the things that we see a fair amount is, like, people will call up and say, hey, I think so and so burned down their house. Well, okay, like, we do not question whether someone burned down their house, as that's not a checkbox in RC Care. That does not affect whether or not someone receives Red Cross assistance. Doesn't matter if they burned down their own house or whether it was hit by lightning or a wildfire or anything else. We will help them if they are disaster affected, whether the disaster is natural or man-made. We do not specify which man made the disaster. And so, but if you have concerns, err on the side of the client, just like we would with anything else. Notify your supervisor, let me know, and I'm more than happy to take a look. Amanda, you have a question?
Yeah, it's really to that. If someone came to me as their supervisor, or if I go to my supervisor with a concern, usually it's around like health information in a case note. Like, what can be done? I mean, obviously counseling the person not to do it again, but like, what would we do? Can we delete it?
Counseling is the big one. In most cases, we cannot delete it. But if it's a repeat problem, we can work with that person on trying to take some remediation. If something like that has happened and we find evidence that it has happened repeatedly in the past, because that's something we'll look for just to make sure, if somebody has like a one-off, we'll go, hey, like that's not okay. But if we get alerted to something like that and find out that that person, every time they've dealt with a client, they'll talk about, this person's medical diagnosis and that person's mental health diagnosis and this other person's breath and, this person's substance use history, that's a much different conversation. And, that's something that where we can work with the region so that the region can have that conversation. Does that kind of help?
It does. And, that's what we do. I was just wondering if there was some super secret squirrel way to delete those, but it sounds like there isn't.
Yeah, not really. We can do some deletion if it's something like we at one point had somebody upload their social security card. Fortunately that can't happen anymore. Where we were able to finagle a way to do that, but it's not super functional to do.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, not a problem. Any other questions here? Check the chat real quick. All right. So kind of in line with documentation and doing compliance review, apologies for any dog ear flapping going on. Dog just shook right next to my microphone. Sort of as we've been having ongoing discussion, I know we're kind of into disaster season here. We are centralizing compliance and document review on larger DRs and working on getting teams set up to provide mutual aid during steady state. So if you are interested in deploying as compliance or document review, I will put the link to the PDF slides into the chat, and there will be a link to the survey, and you can complete that if you have not already. Many of you already have, and thank you for that. And that's actually how we got people to deploy for Guam. So that is one of the places that we look when we look for folks who can deploy. If you are interested in providing mutual aid to other regions, we have a couple of regions who have recently lost their compliance and document and event review folks who have had a little bit of a capacity struggle. So if you are interested in providing that kind of mutual aid, please let me know. And if you have not already, and I'm happy to work with you and help you work with your region and the other regions to maybe get you connected there. So I have some opportunities there for some additional work if you are interested in doing that. Any questions there? Okay, so now let's talk fraud, shall we? We are going to start with the fraud triangle. So why do people commit fraud? Howard, good question. If client identifies a specific medical condition in request for support, we cannot say what, but can say 4 times per day, like urgency. If we are not the like IDC folks, I would say like urgent IDC referral needs medication or needs urgent IDC referral for medication or something along those lines. You can be quite vague.
Without putting the specific medication or any other.
Yes. Yeah. Because there's a lot of things that, like, if you put the medication name, you've just put their diagnosis in. So once you boil down, basically all fraud investigations, we need 3 ingredients. Now, lots of fraud investigations have other ingredients too, but these are kind of the 3 big ones. We need opportunity and motivation or pressure and rationalization. And I've got both pressure and motivation because some people call it one, some people call it the other, and I wanted you to see both of them. And so for some folks, it's motivation, as in what's in it for me. For others, it's, oh my gosh, I'm desperate, I have to do something. So in some of the fraud investigations we see, sometimes it's somebody who was pushed to do something desperate because they were in really dire straits. Some folks are bad actors who are out there to make a buck. So, can go either way, but effectively that motivation is a form of pressure. Pressure is a form of motivation. Organizational culture can also affect this. If you've got good fluency in talking about fraud and mitigating fraud at all levels, can really weaken the sides of this fraud triangle. And just like a stool, if you have a three-legged stool and take off one of the legs, the stool is going to fall over. So it really, really helps to mitigate if you really have the kinds of conversations that we have started having about fraud and about fraud mitigation at all levels of the organization. Now, last month, we talked about identity theft and synthetic identities. This month, we are going to talk about false claims, embezzlement, and it's supposed to be compromised credentials, but it looks like it got hidden behind the screen or picture. So apologies for that. I will fix that before I send out the PDF. Let's talk false claims, shall we? And we're going to look at an actual case. So in August of last year, a man pleaded guilty to conspiring to commit wire fraud. So this is a federal crime. And that crime was against the American Red Cross. And that crime was committed during the Hurricane Harvey response in October of 2017. He stole the personal information of 116 people and used that information over a 5-day period after befriending a person at the local Walmart to obtain nearly $50,000 in financial assistance. So he met and befriended and recruited a cashier and then colluded. But he was not disaster affected, so he was making a false claim. Now, if you'll note here, not all fraud types are just one. So he also committed an identity theft in doing this. Any questions about this?
And maybe you'll get to this, but how did we catch him?
In this case, I will have to look at more information from the Justice Department. But finally somebody recognized him. I mean, after 116 times. Somebody who wasn't his buddy going, hey, wait a second. What? Why are you here again? We also had instances of the real disaster affected people going, hey, wait a minute. What do you mean? I didn't get money from you. What are you talking about? So it's kind of a constellation of things. Another example of false claims, other examples of false claims sometimes do not involve identity theft. So, for example, my neighborhood was just hit by a bunch of severe storms over the last week. However, my home, despite losing power for several days, did not sustain damage. If I went to the American Red Cross and said, hey, my house was destroyed in this storm, and sent pictures of one of the other houses in my neighborhood that has a tree on it, then I would be making a false claim because my house is not damaged. Any questions about false claims? Yeah, this was a pretty gnarly case. Like 5 days, seriously. It's like this guy was moving. One of the other things that I think is noteworthy here is if you notice, Hurricane Harvey was in 2017. This guilty plea was not until 2022. So these cases often take like actual years. So if you're going through fraud investigation and are going, oh my gosh, why is this taking forever? Sometimes they take time. We are still getting restitution from folks that defrauded the American Red Cross after 9/11. So, long time. Now, embezzlement. And I'm not going to talk about specific cases of embezzlement in the Red Cross because, naming names would be bad. But embezzlement is theft or misappropriation of funds that are placed in your trust or that belong to your employer. So embezzlement is a form of internal fraud. So that would be fraud for us that was done by somebody with the Red Cross. And our forms of embezzlement might come in the form of CAC or EFT fraud, might actually come in the form of a P-card fraud too. But we as compliance reviewers don't deal with P-cards. In nonprofits, the top 3 causes of embezzlements are lack of internal controls, lack of oversight over those controls, and overrides of those controls. So these are why we are so grumpy about things like separation of duties. And, if a case is non-compliant, it's really non-compliant and things like that. It's not just, yes, we've got to keep everything straight from an audit perspective, but also these are big risks. And we don't want anybody to wind up kind of in the middle of these risks because that's an unpleasant place to be. Any questions about embezzlement? I actually had an instance of around $25,000 of embezzlement a few years ago that we just finished up getting restitution on. Somebody was just making up clients' names using a phone book and giving himself the CAGs. So now the last one is compromised credentials. And compromised credentials is not something we deal with just a whole lot in compliance, but it's the use of username or password information for an authorized user by unauthorized parties. So just I'm not going to be monitoring your digital hygiene really, but just kind of keep it in mind. Don't leave RC Care open random places. Don't be that person. Remember that your password should be easy to remember for you, but hard to guess for other people. And please, for the love of all that is good on the planet, do not let other people sign into any Red Cross systems using your credentials. We actually had an instance not too long ago where somebody did that. They actually signed into 2 devices and handed the second device to another person. So it looked like a person was creating 2 cases at once. And the data looked really funny. And it looked like fraud. It looked like a compromised credentials fraud. And it wasn't. It was just somebody being reckless with their credentials. But we have also had instances where somebody committed fraud and framed a member of our workforce. And we had to go question that member of the workforce because her username and password was saved on a laptop. And a bad actor got a hold of that laptop, logged in, and created cases and provided himself assistance that he didn't qualify for. but the audit trail made it look like she did it. And that laptop wasn't even in the same state that she was in. So she was framed for this 5 figures worth of fraud. It was a really scary experience for her. So just kind of be aware of this stuff. Any questions about that stuff? I know that's kind of a lot. Yes, Sheila.
Does Red Cross tend to just go after restitution, or do they ever try to get some jail time in there?
Oh yeah, people do jail time too. The person with the embezzlement case I mentioned did some jail time. Several of the folks after 9/11 did some jail time. I know several of the folks after Harvey have done jail time. So yeah, jail time is not unheard of. Generally speaking, you know, because we are not judge and jury. We hand the data off to, we work with the Office of Ethics and Compliance. We hand the data off to the appropriate law enforcement authorities. And then frequently the NHQ compliance team will work with the Office of Ethics and Compliance and those law enforcement officials to make sure they have the data that they need to make whatever case they need to, and will assist them in that process. But they are the ones that make that determination, not us. So we don't get that call. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, the people affected sometimes can't make, recommendations or agree with the recommendations. And I was just curious if Red Cross is more interested in getting the money back than the punishment end of it.
I will say that we relentlessly pursue fraud. And so we will pursue it as far as we can. And then from there, whatever feedback we have provided, law enforcement officials and the either district attorney or state's attorney or US attorney will pick it up and take it from there and do with it what they will. So, and some of it will depend on, what they think they can get. So we frequently don't get a ton of feedback though. Any other questions? As we head into, as disaster season really starts picking up here, kind of be on the lookout for stuff, because most perpetrators of fraud do not go for the really high dollar cases. Most of them go for the lower dollar stuff. So just be aware, not saying, hey, like panic and look for like fraud things around every corner, but just be aware. And, we're going to be talking about digital hygiene kind of coming into the next fiscal year. And we will be talking about duplicate events and things like that. So you may be hearing more from me about that coming into the next fiscal year. And so just be aware of these types of fraud. Are there any questions about any of the types of fraud we have discussed the last 2 months? Before we get into the next thing. Quiet group today. Okay, so we are going to change gears completely and talk about accessibility. So I will divulge that I am color deficient. I am red-green color deficient. partially. And so for me, differentiating between colors is often quite difficult. Salesforce, which is the vendor that runs on which RC Care is based, has changed some of their icons recently. So if you may have noticed, the cases icon has changed color. I think it was like a yellowish kind of color, and now it's darker. It's like an orange or something. But part of that is because Salesforce, not us, Salesforce, made many of their icons darker. And here's examples of those. These are from Salesforce's press release to help improve their accessibility and improve the contrast that is available to their users. So say small step forward in accessibility, but if you notice that color change, that's what that's all about. One of the other questions that I have gotten quite a bit, accessibility, I am not a disability integration person, just somebody who can't see color very well who uses the system. And I've gotten several questions about using dark mode, and RC Care will not allow many dark mode extensions in browsers. And this is one that I currently use, and I'm just throwing it out there so that people are aware. So if you are a user who likes to use dark mode, the Salesforce dark theme is available on Chrome. So it is available to you if you are a user who would benefit from that. Any questions about that stuff? I know that's kind of a different subject than what we normally talk about, but I've gotten several questions about that this month, so wanted to just touch on that while we had everybody together. Melissa mentioning visual accessibility. In terms of the documents, we are working on that. In terms of the sites, Salesforce is making some steps in that direction, and we are getting a new disability integration person. So I am looking forward to lots of progress in that realm. So looking forward to some progress on that front. Really am. So I think we will start to see some progress. I'm really looking forward to it. But for the moment, here are some tools that are available, and I think that if you are a user of either of those, I use the dark theme on some of the red, yellow, and green dashboards. It turns all of the dashboard black with white text, but then I can see the numbers super easily, so it makes it easier for me to read. And had heard from several members of the volunteer workforce who were kind of struggling with that they needed something. So there it is. Okay, so kind of back to our regularly scheduled programming. Remember, if something is off, don't hesitate to file a suspicious case report. Something kind of unusual on this topic that we haven't really talked about. If you hear of anyone being weird about someone filing a suspicious case report, please speak up. There was somebody who filed a suspicious case report not terribly long ago, and people's hair kind of got all haywire and people panicked, and some folks got upset with this volunteer because, oh my gosh, you can't talk about that. Like, oh, good heavens. So if we have any pockets of that kind of nonsense going on, we want to make sure that that's not happening. And we really socialize that just because there's the word suspicious in this title doesn't mean it's automatically fraud. And we can't call it the weirdo thing report. It's just if you file one of these, it just means something looks a little funky, and then we'll do more investigation. So, but if you hear of anyone like being retaliated against or anyone panicking or anything, please let me know. You can also use this report for good stuff. So if you know of responders that have done excellent due diligence, or know of duty officers doing really good due diligence, we got one recently that was actually both responders and a duty officer that had done really good due diligence, and it was a great catch by a group of members of the workforce, and so we were able to kind of share that news both with leadership and then back to the field that, like, hey, this was a great catch. And so it's not always bad news when one of these comes through, and if you can kind of help us get that socialized around, that would be great. Any questions about that?
Chris,
Yes.
Kevin here.
Yeah.
I had a meeting with Illinois, leadership and various people. And we talked about the national headquarters where the name was changed from, the Office of Fraud and Compliance or whatever it used to be to Ethics and Compliance. And I said, for those of you who are familiar with Ted Lasso, ethics is just a nicer word than fraud. And then, to explain why it was changed. And when we're talking about suspicious case reports, I suggested to everyone, don't think of it as, you have to wait to see something suspicious, because that almost implies a level of proof. I said, just think of it, if anything looks questionable, please file the report. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, no, that's a really good threshold. Yeah, if something just looks questionable, yeah, go ahead and file it. It's kind of like the song, things that make you go if something makes you go like, go ahead and file the report. The Office of Ethics and Compliance actually used to be called the Office used to be called Investigation, Compliance, and Ethics. And part of the reason it was changed was because, well, not all of them were investigators in that office. There's only one branch that is investigation, and that's the branch that our team works with. But also that the acronym ICE is associated with a government agency, and we are a non-government organization. And so did not want there to be any confusion between our investigative arm and of a non-government organization and a government agency, because getting those two mixed up would be not ideal. So, but yeah, Kevin, that's a great threshold. If you think of it as like a questionable case report or a questionable call report, unfortunately, we can't put all of the words for the threshold that people are all comfortable with. Somebody suggested that we call it the suspicious case or poor training or error report, and that would be a whole lot of words. We cannot call it the suspicious activity report because that has federal implications. Like, from a financial standpoint, suspicious activity has like federal implications that this is not. So we can't call it that. And so, this is kind of where we landed to most closely align with what it is. And, of course, it's not automatically fraud, so we can't call it the fraud report. So it's kind of this wacky little ephemeral thing, but can be used for all kinds of stuff. Any questions about that? I have observed that the more frequently this gets used, the less people freak out about it. So like if you see something good happening, use it. Like, you know, don't just use it because it's Tuesday or something, but if you see good due diligence, you know, file a report. It's okay to send good news this way. Have you all seen anything in terms of compliance trends that are bugging you, that are unusual? Anything going on for y'all that you want to talk about? Because we've got an open forum here that we can talk about.
Hi, this is Pauline in California.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I do have something that
Sure.
gives me a and gives me a little bit of worry and concern that I've just seen it more often, and so this has got me a little bit raising some hairs on my back of my neck. And what it is that let's say you have 2 or 3 clients, and both clients. So one client, let's call him client A, needs someone else to verify his ID or his address, okay, because it burned up in the fire. Then that person is then the person that they verify for client B, but both of them didn't have ID or proof of that they live there. So how do you rectify that client A can verify for client B when client A didn't even have ID or address verification? That was, I mean, if it was just let's say a neighbor, and neighbor A said, "Oh yeah, they live here," and then neighbor B, so let's say client A gets a verification from a neighbor, and then the client A verifies the ID and address of client B, and so there's no real person that is of authority that has an ID. Does a person have to show an ID who is verifying their someone's that they're the person who they say they are?
Okay, so couple of things that might help with this. First, and we're working on getting it into doctrine, but for now it's something I tell people not to do because it's just really poor compliance practice. And I'm clear about that because it's not doctrine yet. Is not to have people who are affected by the same event confirming one another.
Yeah, so that's what seems to be that's happening.
And so, yeah, so if you are getting that
more often than,
yeah, I would raise that flag. And
okay.
and it's okay if you want to like send an email and say, "Hey, can you look at this case? I'm not sure if it warrants a suspicious case report." I'm always happy to take a look at them too.
Okay.
Yeah, you are welcome to do that, and we can take a look at some cases together. I'm happy to help with that too.
Okay. So the other question was, I had another case and I let it go because I really questioned the caseworkers, because in one case report, they said the person had nobody living with them and that they lived alone, and they got assistance. And then the next time, his, I don't know, so-called some person said they were living with that person, and they got assistance. And I said, well, this is something fishy, because I just made this case compliant for the other person, saying that nobody lived with them, and now you're coming along and telling me that this person does live with them, and you're giving them assistance. So what's the story? And so I said, can you tell me what the discrepancy is? And so the caseworker went back, and one person, and they said, yes, the person said he was only living with them for a few days and then left. And then the other one said, no, they were only, they had only been there a few days and then left. And I'm just totally confused. And I just said, I don't understand what's going on here. But they both stated that the person was now homeless and therefore needed a place and needed assistance. So I let it go, but I felt very uncomfortable about that.
Okay. Why don't we, if you'll send me an email, let's talk offline about that one.
Okay,
And
okay.
let's put our heads together and
Okay.
we'll see what we can figure out.
okay. But
Um,
what you're telling me now is that I should go ahead and anytime I see two cases and they're verifying each other, I should raise a red flag with
Yeah.
you or with a caseworker.
I would go ahead and raise it with a caseworker, and if you see it
Okay.
happen routinely, go ahead and copy me in. I mean, you can always
Okay.
copy me on anything and say, hey, like, this is iffy, like, can we please not do this?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, not a problem. Tanya, you have a question?
Yeah, it's not about a trend, but just a question I have. I know when we reach $1,800 on a case on a CAC, that triggers a compliance review. We're seeing more of those. I guess maybe it is a trend with being able to do multiple RDO exceptions for IDC on a case. We can easily hit over $1,800 on a CAC. I know, the terms are triggers a compliance review, but it doesn't mean it's non-compliant, right? Do they just look at it to make sure that everything was done correctly? I guess I was a little confused about that.
Yes, that is correct. So the idea is that more, for lack of a better term, more expensive cases have more exposure and then more like financial risk per case. And so, we just have folks take a look at the, just to make sure everything happened according to program guidelines. Because everything is so system controlled, the vast majority of them will be compliant. And then since we recently raised our immediate assistance numbers, we are actually, and I'm glad you brought that up so I can talk about it for our next call. One of the things we're going to talk about on the next call, we are actually having some discussions, and I do not know yet what the outcome will be, about potentially raising that threshold that triggers compliance review because of some of the increases in financial assistance. Because just the numbers have come up some, and so we're seeing increases that are not for any reason other than just we increased programmatically. So we're having some discussion about that.
Okay, that's
And-
good. I look forward to hearing more on that. And you're right, with some of these larger families and you put
Yeah.
in some IDC in there and some supplemental, and
Yeah.
you're quickly at 1,800. So I just wanted to make sure we
Yeah.
were doing everything correctly. And then one final quick question.
Yeah.
Are you able to share your PowerPoints or in a PDF with us?
Yes, my
That would
plan
be awesome.
is I'm going to make a couple of quick edits to make sure all the text is visible. And once this call ends, I'm going to save it as a PDF and then stick it in a chat for this meeting. So it will be available to you.
Thank you, Chris. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
not a problem. So our next call, now we're hitting the top of the hour, will be on the 19th of July. If you're seeing issues in your region, if you're seeing issues in the field, let me know. I do know, hopefully we'll have more info about that, maybe raising the threshold. I don't know for sure, but we're having some discussion about it. Send comments, send things you're seeing, send trends my direction. Remember to check out our knowledge base articles. You can search for them in RC Care. And other than that, we will see everybody on the 19th of July. I will hang out here for a bit, but want to be mindful of everyone's time. Great call, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris.